David Martinez used to be worth $300 million. Tech startup. Revolutionary app. Forbes 30 under 30. Penthouse in Manhattan. Life most people only dream about. Then the market crashed. Investors pulled out. The company collapsed. And within 6 months, David lost everything. The penthouse. The cars. The bank accounts. Everything. Most people in his position would have called friends. Family. Asked for help. But David did something different. He decided to live on the streets. Not because he had to. He still had resources, people who would take him in, but because he wanted to understand. Wanted to see how people treated those with nothing. Wanted to test humanity's empathy. So for 6 months, David lived as a homeless man. And what he learned broke him. The contempt. The disgust. The way people looked right through him like he didn't exist. Until one morning, a woman on the subway, beautiful, successful, clearly wealthy, didn't just ignore him. She insulted him. Made a spectacle of her judgment. And David made a decision. He had a blind date scheduled that evening. A setup from a mutual friend. And when he looked at the reservation details and saw the woman's name, Jennifer Chen, he knew. Tonight, he would teach her a lesson. Tonight, she would face exactly who she'd been that morning. The subway car rattled through the tunnel. 7:42 a.m. Rush hour. David Martinez sat in the corner, wearing the clothes he'd worn for 3 days straight. Torn jacket. Weathered face. Cardboard sign that read, "Lost everything. Anything helps. God bless." He'd learned that the morning commute was the worst. People in a hurry. Already stressed about work. Zero patience for someone asking for help. A woman boarded at the next stop. Early 30s. Designer coat. Expensive purse. Phone pressed to her ear, talking loudly about a case she'd won. Corporate lawyer. David guessed. Successful. Confident. The kind of person he used to be. She sat 3 seats away from him, still talking. "I know, Emma. These people think they can just sue without evidence. Please. I ate them alive in court." David approached slowly. "Excuse me, miss. I'm trying to." The woman looked up, and her face transformed. Not into sympathy. Into irritation. Into disgust. "I'm not giving you money," she said loudly, making sure everyone in the car could hear. "Get a job. Stop expecting handouts from people who actually work for a living." David nodded. "I understand. I don't care," Jennifer interrupted. "I worked hard for everything I have. Scholarships. Student loans I'm still paying off. Nobody gave me anything. So I'm not going to enable people who refuse to help themselves." She turned away, went back to her phone call. "Sorry, Emma. Another homeless guy. They're everywhere. Anyway, about tonight. Yes, I'm still coming to the blind date. But if this guy isn't worth my time, I'm leaving after 1 drink." David moved on. Sat back in his corner. And made a mental note of her name. Jennifer Chen. Corporate lawyer. Blind date tonight. His blind date tonight. If you believe in empathy, in seeing people beyond their circumstances, and in the lessons that humble us, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Echoes of Courage, and share this story. Because sometimes the person you judge in the morning becomes the person who changes your life by evening. David hadn't always been homeless. 18 months ago, he'd been on top of the world. Connected. His startup. An app that revolutionized how students and tutors connected. Within 2 years, it had 5 million users. Series B funding at $1 billion valuation. David was 32 years old and worth $300 million on paper. Forbes called him a visionary. TechCrunch called him the future of education technology. Investors called him constantly. He had the penthouse, the Tesla, the life. Then the market shifted. A recession hit. EdTech became too risky. Investors pulled funding. Connected's runway evaporated. David tried to pivot, cut costs, laid off staff. But it wasn't enough. Within 6 months, Connected shut down. David's equity became worthless. The penthouse was leveraged, gone. The car was leased, repossessed. The bank accounts tied up in lawsuits from creditors. He wasn't bankrupt in the legal sense. He still had some money hidden in accounts the lawyers hadn't found. He had friends who'd offered him a place to stay. A cousin who ran a consulting firm and said David could have a job tomorrow. But David didn't take any of it. Because losing everything had given him a strange clarity. For years, he'd worked in tech. Created products for people. But he'd never really understood people. Never understood struggle. Never understood what it meant to have nothing and be treated like nothing. So David made a decision. He would live as a homeless man for 6 months. Experience what millions of people experience every day. Test humanity. Test empathy. See if the world he'd built his business around, connection, education, opportunity, actually existed for people without money. The first week was hell. Sleeping on cardboard. Being invisible. Having people step around him like he was trash on the sidewalk. But David persisted. Because he needed to know. Needed to understand. And what he learned broke his heart. Most people ignored him. Some gave spare change. A few gave food. But many, more than he'd ever imagined, treated him like he was subhuman. Told him to get a job. Called him lazy. Blamed him for his situation without knowing anything about how he got there. People like Jennifer Chen. That evening, David stood in the bathroom of a gym where he'd maintained his membership. Showered. Shaved. Put on the Armani suit he kept in a storage locker. Styled his hair. Looked in the mirror. The transformation was remarkable. Same man. Completely different treatment. He arrived at the Sterling at 7:25 p.m. The host recognized him. David had been a regular before the company collapsed. Mr. Martinez. It's been too long. Your table is ready. David sat down. Ordered sparkling water. And waited. Jennifer Chen arrived at 7:33 p.m. She looked beautiful. Professional. Confident. She scanned the restaurant, saw David, and smiled as she approached. Then she got close enough to see his face. And the smile died. David watched the recognition hit her. Watched her face go pale. Watched her freeze 3 feet from the table. Hello, Jennifer, David said calmly. Please. Sit down. Jennifer's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You were. This morning you were. Homeless. David finished. I was. Please. Sit. Jennifer sat slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. I don't understand. How are you? What is this? David leaned back. My name is David Martinez. 6 months ago, I was worth $300 million. I founded Connected, maybe you've heard of it. Jennifer nodded slowly. The tutoring app. It shut down. It did, David confirmed. And I lost everything. Well, almost everything. I could have stayed with friends. Found work. But instead, I made a choice. I decided to live on the streets for 6 months. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to understand. Understand what? Jennifer whispered. How people treat those who have nothing, David said. I wanted to see if empathy still existed. If kindness was real or just something people performed when it benefited them. Jennifer's hands trembled on the table. This morning, I didn't know. Would it have mattered? David interrupted. If you'd known I was a former CEO, would you have treated me differently? Because that's exactly the point, Jennifer. You treated me that way because you assumed I deserved it. Because I was homeless. Because I had nothing to offer you. Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes. I worked hard for everything I have. I believe in personal responsibility. In meritocracy? David asked. In the idea that everyone who succeeds earned it and everyone who fails deserved it? Jennifer looked down. Yes. Before we continue, pause and comment below. How do you treat people who have nothing to offer you? Are you kind only when it benefits you? Be honest. We're all learning. David sighed. Jennifer, I used to think the same way. I built a billion-dollar company. Thought I was special. Thought I'd earned every bit of it through hard work and intelligence. Then I lost it. And I realized how much of my success was luck. Right place. Right time. Right connections. Right investors. Right market conditions. I worked hard, yes. But so do millions of people who never get the opportunities one got. He leaned forward. You know what I learned living on the streets? That homeless people aren't lazy. Most of them work. They have jobs, low-wage jobs that don't pay enough for rent in cities where a studio apartment costs $2,000 a month. I met veterans with PTSD, single mothers escaping abuse, people with medical debt that bankrupted them, people whose lives fell apart through circumstances beyond their control. Jennifer wiped her eyes. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't, David said. Because it's easier to judge. Easier to believe that poverty is a moral failing. That if people just tried harder, worked harder, they'd succeed. It protects you from the uncomfortable truth that life is random. That you could lose everything tomorrow through no fault of your own. That the only difference between you and the person you stepped over this morning might be one bad diagnosis. One layoff. One family emergency. Jennifer's voice broke. I'm so sorry. I was cruel. I was. You were honest, David said. That's actually why I wanted to have this dinner. Not to punish you. To help you see. Because, Jennifer, I looked into your background. Yale Law. Scholarship student. Immigrant parents. You clawed your way up from nothing. You know struggle. You know what it's like to be underestimated. So why do you treat others the way you hated being treated? Jennifer covered her face with her hands. I don't know. I think I wanted to distance myself from where I came from. Wanted to prove I was different. Better. That I earned my success and other people just. She stopped. Oh my God. I became exactly the kind of person I used to hate. David reached across the table. Not touching her. Just close enough to offer connection. The good news is you can change. You can choose differently. That's what empathy is, Jennifer. It's not feeling sorry for people. It's recognizing that their circumstances could be yours. That dignity isn't earned by success. It's inherent. Everyone deserves it. What do I do? Jennifer whispered. How do I fix this? You start by seeing people, David said. Really seeing them. Not their circumstances. Not what they can offer you. Just seeing them as human beings who deserve respect. You volunteer. You donate. But more importantly, you check your judgment. Every time you want to label someone as lazy or undeserving, you ask yourself, what don't I know about their story? Jennifer nodded, tears streaming freely now. I'm so ashamed. Don't be ashamed, David said gently. Be changed. Shame keeps you stuck. Change moves you forward. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jennifer asked, why did you agree to this blind date? Emma set it up weeks ago. You could have cancelled when you saw it was me. David smiled. Because Emma is an old friend. And because I believe in second chances. I wanted to see if you were capable of growth. If being confronted with your own judgment would break you or transform you. And Jennifer asked. I think you're capable of transformation, David said. If you choose it. 3 months later, Jennifer Chen quit her corporate law job. Started working for a nonprofit that provided legal aid to homeless individuals. Took a 70% pay cut. Moved into a smaller apartment. And every morning on her commute, she carried extra cash and granola bars. Not because she felt guilty. Because she'd learned to see people. David Martinez eventually moved back into housing. Started a new company, this one focused on affordable housing solutions. Used his experience to advocate for policy changes. And remained friends with Jennifer, who'd become one of his nonprofit's biggest supporters. They never dated. That wasn't what either of them needed. What they needed was the lesson. The transformation. The mirror that forced them both to see who they really were and who they could become. The night after that dinner, Jennifer went back to her apartment and cried for 3 hours. Not from shame. From awakening. From realizing she'd been sleepwalking through life, judging people while claiming to be enlightened. Performing compassion while practicing cruelty. But she woke up. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Echoes of Courage, and share it with someone who needs to remember that every person has a story. Leave a comment. When was the last time you showed kindness to someone who couldn't offer you anything in return? Let's inspire each other. Thank you for watching. Remember, the person you judge today might be the person who teaches you the most important lesson of your life tomorrow. Choose empathy. Choose always.